Hello everyone and welcome back to this next episode in this series where I'll take you through how to make a multiplayer inventory system. In this episode we'll be going over how to make a very basic UI system for the inventory system, which is going to be including like a grid panel, the UI slots, a better way to handle your hood, and a few other things that I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, let's begin. So first things first, that you'll want to do is go to your content browser, go to your UI folder, right click and go to user interface and widget blueprint. Click on user widget and just name it WD_hood, standing for widget blueprint_hood, obviously. Just open it up, make sure that's saved, and just put in a canvas panel. This is going to form the basis of our hood. Compile and save it, and let's go to our main game mode. So here it is. So you have a hood class here in the game mode. This is what's going to basically this is basically what I usually use for my UI stuff to set up what I want certain game modes to load for certain different things. So yeah, let's begin with that. If you don't have one, you should have a button here saying create new blueprint. If not, then just create a new blueprint class and you should be able to just type in hood, and there you go. Now this is different than a widget. This is like a game mode or a game state, player controller, that sort of thing. It's an actor in of itself, and sorry, I need to re-record this tutorial, so still got some remnants from the last recording. Basically it's a whole other actor by itself that gets loaded in and initialized. So if I was to go and play this and just type in the outliner, you can see here the yellow text kind of means that this has been instantiated at runtime rather than placed in the level. So you can see here it's an actor that you can communicate with, and as a result you can just do something like an actor. Okay, to spell it correctly, there you go. Get actor location and just print this, and it will be valid. Not prime sound, jeez. And just type that in there, compile, and it works fine. Now, a lot of other tutorials out there will probably have you put the UI work within the player controller or the player character. I don't really like doing that because that's not the role of those classes. It's not their job to handle the UI stuff. Unreal already has the class for you to do that for each game mode, which is the hood. So let's create a widget here and stop wasting time. So create a widget. I'm going to create the WD_hood. And the owning player is basically just like what player controller is owning this widget, which can be quite important for multiplayer purposes. So we're just going to be using the hood version here. When you're using the basic user widgets, you would be using it owning player here, but we are not on a widget, we are on a hood. So we get that one, and then we add this to the viewport. And now if we were to go back to a WB hood and just add a breakpoint on event construct, and I'll play it. Okay, maybe we need to actually call this because it's disabled. There we go. And play it, and there we go. Perfect, so now we can start building up our hood, and let's begin. So go to your content drawer, go down to plugins, and just go to your content folder within the plugins folder. Right click and create a new folder called UI. I'm going to create two new widget blueprints. The first one is going to be called WD_inventory panel, and the second one is going to be called WB_inventory slot. Now open both of these up. If you're wondering how I did that, just shift left click to select the ones you want to open and press enter. It'll open all the blueprints that are selected. Okay, go back to your WB_hood and just drag out the panel into the designer, and I'm going to anchor mine to the bottom. I'm going to set the alignment to 1 so it snaps upwards, and I'm going to set the alignment here, so it's about 250 above it. There we go. So it's a nice neat 250. And yes, so we set the anchors there and just set that to 0 and perfect. Now let's go to our inventory panel. We're going to start off with a scale box. Now a scale box, as the name implies, will just make sure that the contents within it will scale correctly given a certain resolution. And that's perfect for what we want, because we want this UI to be quite scalable on all different sorts of monitors, and we can test that, at least give it a little bit of a sanity check within the UI here. We'll start off with a border, and as you can see here, it's been scaling like that. Let's actually set that to the side instead, so we can get a better idea of what it's going to look like. We're setting it to scale to fit. That, I believe, is what we want. I'll have to double check that. The next thing that we'll go for is a grid panel. No, not a grid panel, sorry, a scroll box, because we want to be able to make sure that whatever we put inside of this panel, you can search through it. And then a grid panel. Grid panel, uniform. I think grid. That should be fine. We're going to rename this to inventory container. Make sure that's a variable, and make sure it's set to fill. And the padding, I'm going to add 10, and on the scroll box, I'm going to add a padding of 5. Now, I'm not usually the UI guy. I'm usually the person that deals with the back end and the programming stuff. So forgive me if there's any UI artists out there that are cringing at every step that I make here. But this is genuinely what works for me. At least well enough to get a demo out. So I'm going to make the border a nice darkish colour, maybe a bit see-through, just to really give it some contrast there. The brush, can I do any outline stuff? I don't think I can. Oh well, let's go back to our hood to see how that looks. That's not exactly what we want, so let's set the scale to fit, to set scale to fit X, I believe is what we want. Yes, okay. Now why is that not scaling up correctly? It's because the border is not set to scale or feel correctly there, and that's set to padding of 52. No, we want a padding of 20, maybe 30 to give that a bit more stability. Sorry about that. And there we go, that's more of what we want. And if we were to go back to our inventory slot in here, we'll probably want a size box, I think is the first step, and then a scale box to wrap around it. In the scale box, we'll want an overlay, so we can fully take advantage of all the elements that we can add. And then in the overlay, I'm going to add an image first of all. That's going to fill both horizontally and vertically, and some text. And I'm going to make sure the text is in the bottom right, and the justification is from the right. And let's make the text black. There we go. Okay, let's just see how that looks if we were to place it within the grid panel. Okay, that's not great. Let's try it that way. There we go. Now this is set to desired, so it might not show up correctly. But if we were to, can we? If I file save, let's try re-adding it. Sometimes there's a bit of an issue. No? Okay. Let's go back then and do all that. So why isn't this not? Let's set this back to fill screen. Let's set the image to something. Maybe that's what's wrong. Let's set it to this, for example, and let's actually make this align horizontally and all that good stuff. to here. Okay, and go back to here, and it's not exactly what we want. At least the scroll box works. Whoops. Okay, let's go to our slot and just make that center aligned there, maybe. And maybe I got these the wrong way around. Let's wrap this with a scale box. Okay, I think I may have fixed it. So we have a scale box that's set to fit. And then we have a border that's underneath that. That's set to align itself, fill horizontally, vertically. And they have a size box that's also set to fill in both directions. Inside there we have an overlay. That's again there. We'll set the padding to 10, no 5. I think 5's better. The scale box is scale to fit X, but I think I might change that to scale to fit, just so that we have something there. I'll set the padding to 5. And the image, let's set that to something to see if it has truly worked out for the best yet. Seems so. We'll set the alignment to be in the center. Then the text, I'll set that back down to there. I'll set the color to black. And I will change the font size to something like 70, so it's a bit more visible. So if we now compile this, go back to our panel. It's still vibrating a little bit, but that's to be expected. If we generate a new one, you'll see that we don't get another one in the viewer, but that's because in the grid panel we have to manually set the rows and the columns ourselves, and we can do that very handily with these little arrows. Now it's vibrating. I think that's to do with the scale box itself. It might be because we're in desired. Again, I'm not the UI guy, and it's still not entirely working correctly. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so if you just go to the parent scale box in the inventory panel and just set it to scale to fit, it should fix that shaking and give us the correct inventory slots here. If we were now to resize this, as you can see, the images scale to fit appropriately, which is what we were after. That's why we went through all that pain. And as you can see here, I believe that's the ultra-wide monitor test there. And as you can see, the images do scale to fit that correctly. You may need to do some more tweaking to really nail down how the scaling should work. But for my purposes, I'm just going to stick with 1920 by 1080. So this should be fine for my scaling. I'm just going to add some offset, just so it's not clinging to the sides of the monitor. And let's actually reset this. So the image size here, that's probably what you'd want to tweak if you're having any issues. And yeah, let's get on with the rest of the tutorial at last. Like I said near the beginning of this tutorial, I'm not the UI guy. I have no clue what I'm doing when it comes to UI. I just try to make something look good, and then I say it's good enough. I'm just going to call that placeholder underscore quantity, and I'm going to rename the text block to. Let's actually just copy. I'm feeling lazy. Let's just copy and paste this up here. Say text block underscore quantity, and in the graph, I'm just going to make sure that that's actually set text. I'm just going to make sure that's set to nothing, so it, doesn't show up as just underscore placeholder text. And let's compile this and play it. As you can see here, we have our slots in the UI, and just like in the editor, if you scale this, it should scale correctly with it. I believe that's scaling correctly. That's good. Alright, next step, actually getting this UI to respond to changes in the inventory. I'm going to do that within the inventory panel. This is where we should be listening to stuff, and actually before I forget, because I ran into an issue with this before, I'm actually going to delete these slots here. so that when we come to add our own, it should be all good. So on event construct, what I'm going to do is get owning player, and this gets the player controller. Now, if you remember, this is where we store our inventory component. If you're storing it on the player pawn, the player state, then you need to get access to those actors instead. And you can do that with get owning player pawn here if you're on the player character. And from player pawn, you should be able to get player state as well. You don't want to do get player state. Where is it? You don't want this one, because this is basically the same as get player controller. It takes in the index, which is not what you want to do when you're doing multiplayer. In single player, it doesn't really matter, honestly, but for multiplayer it does. So that's how you get access to all those different classes safely within multiplayer. So get owning player, and we just want to get component by class, and we want to get the inventory component base. Now, if you remember from our last episode, we did the on item change delegate. If you haven't, please do check it out. It is quite vital for this bit, obviously. We are listening for changes in the inventory. Okay, and what we also want to do is get inventory size. Okay, and what we're going to do for this is a for loop, but before we do the for loop, we have to take into account that this is returning how many slots we have, but that's not exactly, that's going to give us the wrong number, because this is not 0 based, this is 1 based, and we need this to be 0 based for our for loop. So it's quite simple to fix. We just subtract 1 from there, and that goes into the last index. First index is 0. You could probably just add 1 here, but I like working with 0 based arrays. It makes everything so much simpler. So let's add a little reroute node here, and another one. You could just double click like that, but why not? Okay, so what we want to do is get slot, get inventory slot, and get the index. If you don't have this, I'll just generate the project file. If you don't have this, you just need to go to your IDE, and in your inventory component base, project, you just need to add a few more lines of code. I'll just quickly show them just in case you don't have it. All you'll need to do is declare a new function called get inventory slot, taking in the index, and then you're just returning if the inventory items, if the index is a valid index of the item inventory, then you return that slot at that index. If it's not, then you just return an empty inventory slot. That's simple as it is. And to make sure that you can call it within Blueprint, you need to actually define as a U function. Blueprint. Don't do it here. Do not do it here. Do it in your header when you're declaring stuff. Actually, it's probably best if I wait to show you. There we go. Can I access this stuff now? Cool. Component base. I'm just going to go all the way down to my utility methods here, and you can see here, that's what you'll want. Get inventory slot, and there you go. Now, it's very important that you take into account that this is not the server index, this is the local index, and yeah, I'm going to try and do it so that the server index and the local index sort of match. Does that make sense? It might not be worth doing that, actually. Maybe. But if this is listening, if we have our index here, and then, because on the inventory slot we actually have our server index, if that updates the correct slot on the UI, then when you go to play it, then it should update correctly? No, yes, no. I think we might need to do a small bit of refactoring in this episode as well, unfortunately. But for now, let's focus on getting the inventory slot here, and let's create a new widget. And let's create our inventory slot. Now, we actually need to pass in the slot information So let's create a new, no, not a new variable. Actually, yeah, new variable. Let's call it slot info. Let's just call it inventory slot. And we'll get that structure that we got. And we'll come up with a new custom event to say set. Actually, no, we don't need a custom event. We can just make this exposed on spawn, and then we got it instantly when we create the widget. Then go back to our inventory panel, refresh the node, and there we go. Perfect. Now we'll grab our grid panel inventory container. If you don't see it there in the variables list, just go back to your designer, click on the inventory container, and make sure that is variable is ticked. Okay, so we'll get that, and we'll add child to grid, and now as you can see here, we have an in row and in column. Now, this is where a little bit of maths comes into play. Okay, so we have a simple grid like this. Let's, yeah, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And let's just say that these are the columns up here. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3. These are indices in our column, and these are the rows. So 0, 1, 2. So how do you define which column it should go into? Do you see anything suspicious about these numbers? They're all 4 apart. So what you need to do is, we're going to call each one of these numbers in the grid I, and to get the column we just need to divide, or sorry, get the modulo. I'm getting ahead of myself there. We need to do the modulus operation on the number of columns. I know I misspelled that. I'm not Thor from Pirate Software, okay? I don't know how to exactly write in Paint efficiently. But basically, we need to do the modulus operation here to say which column it should be in. So 0 modulo 4 is 0, 1 modulo 4 is 1, 2 modulo 4 is 2, 3 modulo 4 is 3, 4 modulo 4 is 0, because it's the remainder of the division, which is 0. And then you go on like this with all the elements in the grid. So 5, take the modulo operation of that for 4, and you get 1, because it's 4 divided, because you can do 5 divided by 4 one time and have 1 remainder over. Okay? Now, to get the row, it's again quite simple. What can you recognise about these numbers? Well, it's literally just I divided by number of columns. And I know I misspelled that again, but I don't really care about that right now. So if you take 0, divide that by 4, we have 0. 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. 2 divided by 4 is 0.5, and so on and so on. So you take the division, and then you should also round down. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. 5 divided by 4 is 1.25, and you take the round down operation. It's also called a floor, and you get 1, and you do that for however elements you have. Okay, so let's fill that in. So let's get the index. We have that readily over here, and we'll take the modulo operator and the division operator, and we will feed it the same information. We should probably put these the other way around, because the division goes into row, modulo goes into column. Now let's promote this to a variable and just call it num columns. And I'm actually going to spell it correctly this time, just to prove that I know how to spell it correctly. And let's put those in there like that. Do not forget to compile the blueprint and set this equal to something. I'm going to set mine equal to 5, I believe. And compile, save it, and yes, let's see if that's worked as it should. Yes. Okay, so there's no padding, obviously. Why not? I don't know. Let's go to our inventory slot. Did I forget to add padding? I forgot to add padding here. Okay. Click on the very root element in the designer view in the hierarchy. It should be called WD underscore inventory slot. Here is where you can assign all the default values. I'm going to set the padding equal to, let's go to 25. Let's give it a decent amount of padding in between each element. Let's go to our inventory panel, and let's make the size box actually centered, because I believe that looks a lot nicer. And there we go. We have some padding around each element, and it's now in the center of view. Perfect. Now let's make it so that the information that we have given it at the beginning actually displays. So instead of nothing going in here, we get our slot info, we'll split it, and we will get our item. Now the item is where we get most of our information from, so let's get item icon, and let's get item name. Okay, so the item name goes in there. The icon, we need to actually get our image and set brush from texture. Now it would be better to use a soft texture rather than a hard texture, because it's going to be easier to load that in and out of memory and all that good stuff that we discussed before. But for learning purposes, this should be fine. And let's also make sure that we actually are listening for these changes. How are we going to do this? Okay, so if we have a slot here, if we have an index, this index is going to probably be the local index, and this is going to contain the server index. So if I am correct, then we can't just do a simple array, because if we hold the... No, wait, we could. We might be able to, because this is the same index. We can't guarantee that. Yeah, I think a simple array should work here. Yes. So we don't need to do any refactoring today, thank God. But if there's any issues that come up because of this in your projects, do please let me know, and I will certainly take a look into it. Let's add this to an array. No, not promote to a variable. We need to add unique to an array. And let's promote the array to a variable, and we'll just call it inventory slot widgets. There we go. Okay, and when we do this, we'll need to get the server index from here. Yeah, we'll need to do an array. We'll need to do a map, not an array. Let's make this a map. And yes, change variable type. Yeah. What we'll need to do is change... Oh, it's the wrong way round. It's the wrong way round. Yeah, we'll change that to int, and we'll change this to... I hate doing it this way, but it's the only way I can think of doing it off the top of my head in such a short amount of time. I'm trying to keep this tutorial under half an hour. So now we have our map here. We will add new element, and we will break from the inventory slot here the server index, and we'll add the return value here. Okay. So now when we listen for changes here, we should be able to update the correct slot here, and we should also have something here. Yes. Okay. So let's go to our server index here, and we will find our correct slot. So find, given this, a branch, and we will now set slot info like this. I should not have split this, recombine, and I will break it like that. That makes much more sense. Actually, we need an actual method for this because we are doing stuff with it. So set slot info, and set like that. And a nice little shortcut is just being able to drag it over here like that. And make sure you compile before going back to the inventory panel. So we'll find it and then set slot info like there, and set it like this. So okay, so go back to the inventory slot here, and we will just simply connect it up like that. It should now, hopefully, when I go to play, and now go over to here, and updates. Perfect. Okay, so the text might need to be a little bit bigger. Whoops. Okay, so I'll set that equal to something crazy like 120 then. Is it still not visible? What the? Oh, because I said it's equal to nothing. There we go. Okay. And I've just realised that I set this equal to the item name rather than the quantity. I wonder how many people have been screaming at me that this was incorrect. I do apologise. It's been a long day at work. Okay, so we've got 0, 0, 0, 0, and then we have 1, 1, and then if we come over here, I am fairly sure that these are set to stack. Yep. If I was to press 1 to use an item, it disappears. Perfect. Okay, so last step, I guess, is to actually set it so that when we click on one of these slots, then we can actually use it. So the first thing that I want you to do is create an event dispatcher. So on slot click, or activated I should rather say. And as an input, I will just pass in an integer to say slot server index. And on functions here in the slot, override on mouse down. Now we just want to add a call to the parent function, like that, and we also just want to call on slot activated, like here, and don't forget to pass in the server index that we are on. Go back to the inventory panel, and when we create the slot widget, don't forget to assign on slot activated, and just copy this bit where you get in the inventory component, and let's just use item index, and pass that in, and get the quantity. Okay. Or no, wait, that's wrong, because if you go back to here in your C++, go to use item and attempt to use item index. If we are calling the server RPC, then what are we doing? Get item index. Here, and what we're doing here, if it's valid, then getting it there. Are we using get server index? Yes, we are. Now the get server index, I do apologize, is getting the server index at an index. So what we should probably be doing is use item index is if I go to here, if I press Alt Enter in rider at least, we're going to change the signature, and we're just going to simply add a boolean to say use local index, like so. Yeah, this can be not the function, this can, yeah, it doesn't really matter if it's constant or not. Use false, because we probably use it. Yeah, use false everywhere except where we want it to. And if we are using local index, then we pass in index. If we're not, then we pass in get server index. Okay, so what is this doing? What this is doing is making it so that we aren't essentially using the translation between the different indices, so that when we use this function here, we are actually using the server index that we have maintained, and well, yeah, that we have maintained within the slot and stored, so that it doesn't get accidentally overwritten. Because if you go to use item in the slot 2, for example, but in the back end in the inventory component you're using the server index at that slot, which is actually set to item 4, that's going to feel quite bad. So hopefully what this means is that when we use this function and we are using the local index, it stops that from happening essentially. So let's compile this, let's save everything and then exit out the editor so we can recompile, and then we should be done, I believe. So let's run this. Okay, so we'll dismiss that. We'll go back to our UIs, inventory panel, and we will set this equal to true. Now then, hopefully this means that when I go up to one of these, stack it, I'm going to press Alt and click on it using test item. Okay, so now that we set this to true, if we were to go to our first person HUD here, what we will do is set input mode. This is just a test, so you guys can set this up however you want. Get earning player controller. Pass that in. The widget to focus is here. The mouse lock, I'm not going to lock it. And I'm just going to show the mouse cursor. This is literally just so that you guys can test it properly. Make sure it's all working before you build your whole game around it. So if we were to go over to, let's go over to here. And then click here. Using test item. Why is it not working? Let's have a look at the log. Use test item, implements it using test item. Oh, because I haven't told it to remove it. That's why. And now this presents the same issue. We need to probably add this Boolean check on every single thing that's using an index. So let's do that real quick. Set that equal to false for each usage, and we'll just make sure that this is also doing pretty much the same thing. So we use local index. If true, then get pass in the index. If false, use the mapping. Okay. And is there anywhere else that I can see? That's the actual method. Attempt use item index. Yep. Okay. So we'll save what we've done here. Save all. Go back to here. Okay. So it's open back up again. Let's press yes here. And let's just make sure that when we are removing the item or requesting it to be removed, that we use the local index as well. And let's test this bit out as well. There we go. And it clears it for us, which is nice. Okay, so I believe that's all I set out to do today. And yes, I would hope that that's everything I needed to cover today. If you guys did find this useful, please do leave a like, subscribe down below. Perhaps leave a comment if you found it helpful, or you have any additional questions, any requests for more entries into this addendum series. I'm always open to more suggestions. I love hearing from you guys, and yeah.